Hello, this is Gary Marr of Glenville Community College. This screen capture is for my CIS150AB students. In this screen capture, I wanted to review some of the topics and vocabulary covered in the section 8 and 9, a little bit in 10 of our textbook on object-oriented programming. I've got a couple questions and reflections that you guys provide for me weekly, and I thought it might be a good opportunity to kind of explain how some of this stuff works in a video versus just reading it out of a textbook or off of PowerPoint slides. So what I have here is two files. I have a file called checkbookapp.py, which is a Python program. I also have another one called checkbookclass.py, which is written in Python, but it's actually just a class file. By being just a class file means that I can't execute this block of code. This block of code defines something called a checkbook because it's a class, and in that thing I have instance variables, which are the data defined by that class, and also methods or functions. They become a method when they belong to a class. The term is synonymous. Functions and methods pretty much are the same thing. It becomes a method when it's owned by a class. So these methods are going to have accessor and mutator methods. The mutator method's a set because it's going to change the value of my instance variable. And the accessor the accessor method is a get because it's going to return that value back to the call point. So here I go. Here's my class file checkbook. It describes a thing. The data that it has in this particular class is very simple. Just three members: deposits, checks, and balance. It has one public instance method which would return, actually just prints out the checks, the deposits, and the balance, all coming from the class itself. And below here it has accessor and mutator methods which provide the public interface in using this class. So in other words, these private instance variables can only be changed by members of this class file, which are the set and get deposits. However, over here is the application that's going to consume this class, checkbook class, and actually put values inside the instance variables and retrieve them as part of its processing. So the first thing this does is this is a Python application written for a PC. I'm using Python here because I think it better illustrates the concepts of mutator, accessor, public, private, some of those modifiers you're going to see in object-oriented programming, whether it be in a Python class, a C class, or Java class. So this is going to import sys, which is something that Python provides but doesn't include by default. And there must be something in this program that calls from that imported file. I'm not sure what it is. We'll probably see it in a second. The more important import is here. From checkbook class, which is what we were just in over here, I want to import everything. So what this is saying is that all this code here now becomes available to this application. Now, this application happens to be for a PC. If I was writing code for a, let's say, a tablet, I'd probably be using Python still. Maybe I'd be putting together on an Apple machine. I would still be able to import that class file in there, thus code reuse. So that's the whole reason for learning object-oriented programming. And what you may find as you get in these other classes is we will probably always require you to create and understand how custom classes work. But as a programmer in the real world, most of the time you may not be creating your own classes, but instead using or consuming other people's work. And you can think of it this way. When you go into Excel, did you guys have to do all the programming necessary to put that menu bar on top? Or are you just assuming that it's there every time and you're going to use it in a consistent fashion? Well, yeah. Well, that's basically what's happening here. When you create a class file, you're going to give this to other programs so they can use that code or logic in a consistent fashion. Code reuse. It'll save time and hopefully money. And it's a very important part of every programming language that really is utilized in today's world. There's such a backlog of programs that need to be created that it's crazy to take software and reinvent the wheel. If you have something like this program here which calculates a balance for a checkbook, is it necessary for 10 programs to write their own version or just use the version that's created for the bank itself? I would argue that's a better way. So what this program is going to do is it's going to instantiate two classes into two different object variables. One's going to be called Gary, one's going to be called Mike. And the way Python works, it simply just takes and creates an identifier variable, and then calls out the class name, checkbook, which is over here, checkbook. Okay. It now becomes available for this application to call it out. So this application says Gary, that instance there, and this is empty at this point. Gary and Mike don't have anything in them, but I'm going to start to put something in them. So Gary, I'm going to call set deposits, which happens to be a member right here. Give it a value of $100, and $100 will be stored in the deposits instance variable. Now, just a little caveat here. This is a simplified Python program. It doesn't contain all the necessary syntax for public or private. So I'm cheating a little bit here, but I think that the cheating will make this easier to understand. Mike also gets $100. Does Mike have available to it a set deposits? Yeah, the class file that I used for Gary is the same class file that Mike has a copy of. So now I had 100 for Gary, Mike has 100. I come down a little lower, I'm going to print something to the screen, and then I'm going to take and add more to my deposit. I'm going to do that by calling set deposits again. And this time I'm going to take and add 100, and I'm going to add it to whatever the get deposits returns. And remember, sets and gets are accessor-mutators. The get is the accessor, so it's going to return whatever values in deposits now. Well, it should be 100 from before. It's going to add 100 to it, and it's going to use set deposits to make that the new balance for deposits. So Gary now has $100 plus $100 or $200. Mike is a much bigger spender. He's going to actually a much better saver, I should say. He's going to put $1,009 in his account, okay, and he's going to add it to whatever was there before, $100. And now I'm going to write some checks. Gary's going to write checks of $100 with a set checks. Is there a set checks? There it is, okay. And then Mike's going to write checks of $500. He uses the set checks to do that. And now down below here, finally, I want to show what the balance is for both these accounts. So for Gary's account, I'm going to call Curveball. Is Curveball in here? Yes, it's a public instance method that as long as you have access to the class, you can call. And what it's going to return is a calculation of that private information. It's going to start into set balance, which is going to be the difference, and then it's going to display that to the screen. This is a very simple example of how you would use a class object with an application. The application really just has references to accessing the class file, that thing called checkbook. It gets access to that external file with this import statement. That's pretty typical of most programming languages. It uses sets and gets to either update the instance value of that class object or retrieve it. Okay, and even though set and get are on your examples in the textbook, your examples that are out there with Canvas, and also in this example, most languages use those by default. Set means to change the value, get means to retrieve it, and it's not necessary in Python or any languages to actually have that word there. That word is a trigger because it's an industry standard, a professional standard that programmers use to indicate this method is going to be part of a class file, and it's going to either retrieve something or set something. Now, hopefully that helps, and if there's any other videos you guys like to have concerning classes, inheritance, exception handling, let me know. Thank you.